Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Japan has appointed Sanae Takaichi as its first female prime minister, marking a historic milestone in a country where women remain underrepresented in political leadership. While her rise is seen as a symbolic breakthrough, Takaichi has maintained her conservative stance, advocating for stricter immigration controls and taking a firm position on China. And joining us now to discuss her appointment and what it could mean for Japan's political landscape is Ram Mason, Associate Professor of International Relations and Japanese Foreign Policy at the University of East Anglia. Good to have you back on TVP World. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning.
So let's start with the optics here. I mean, this is a big deal. This is the first female prime minister in Japan. How much of this is this really symbolism? Is it more? What's the first takeaway here?
Well, there is some symbolism involved, but at the same time, it is an important step because if you think about it, there's always a kind of disconnect or a lag between when a particular event occurs or a particular change in approach happens and then the societal impacts of that. So I think it's important in terms of Takaichi Sanae being the first female prime minister because it will inspire a generation to break that glass ceiling, which after all in countries as well known and prominent as the United States, for example, hasn't happened. So it's not just optics, but in terms of the policy content, we don't expect a radical or dramatic change.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to the policy content in a moment. You said inspiring generations. If we're looking, though, at let's say, the political continuity here, I mean, she's going to be the fourth prime minister in 5 years. Do you think she has let's say, the special glow here, if you will, or something unique that she's going to break that short-lived cycle, or is this going to be a short-lived premiership? What's your take?
Well, it's difficult to know because there tends to be a kind of fluctuation in Japan between very short-lived premierships and then much longer ones. But the much longer ones are much rarer, so the odds are stacked against her somewhat. And she does have rivals in the ruling party, the LDP. So it's not the case that she somehow has a clean slate and now she's going to, ride into the sunset with years or decades ahead of her. But, there is some hope in the sense that she has a number of powerful allies as well. And this comes after a period, as you say, of successive short premierships. This happened as well back in, for all the time really from 2009 through to 2012, and then again in the recent period. So between that, you've had Abe and before that Koizumi, who were much longer premiers. But other than those two, you've basically had almost an annual turnover of prime ministers in Japan. So the odds are stacked against her, but this does seem to mark something of a watershed. So perhaps she will be longer standing than many others.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in Japan and I think globally, some are already calling her the Iron Lady. She herself professed herself as a fan of Margaret Thatcher and also Donald Trump. In fact, she's going to be meeting President Trump fairly soon. So what is that now? What are those dynamics at play? How is she going to be getting along with strong personalities like Donald Trump and other world leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think she will definitely be leaning on the conservative side, to say the least. And the comparisons with Thatcher might not be that accurate, although she does herself talk about Thatcher as being something of an inspiration and a role model. But in terms of Donald Trump, yes, you would think at least the suggestion would be that it would strengthen the U.S. Japan alliance because Takaichi is very much from that conservative side of the party, which has traditionally got on very well, particularly with Republican American presidents. And you have to bear in mind that there's a much longer lineage to this than just her and Donald Trump's personalities. There's a tradition going all the way back, certainly to Ronald Reagan and Nakasone Yasuhiro, but actually even further than back to the likes of the early parts of Kishi and so on, right back to the beginning of the party, whereby the Japanese conservative prime ministers tend to align very closely with Republican presidents. So she fits very well into that mold. So her timing in terms of coming to power when Donald Trump is in power certainly suits the alliance and the US-Japan relationship.
And speaking of alliances, Professor, she's already sort of hinted at her desire to expand the Japanese military. I mean, that's been already ongoing, potentially change even more that pacifist constitution. Defense matters right now, especially in the Asia-Pacific, but also for Europe. Let's shift over to Europe now. What is that relationship going to look like between Japan, Central Eastern Europe, the European Union? I mean, these are also very powerful links.
Yeah, and I think actually in some respects, Japan has an ideal position to play this, watashi yaku, or this kind of bargaining role or bridging role, really, where it kind of fits between the United States and Europe. And although, as we've just mentioned, Takaichi leans certainly towards the US side in terms of her policies, or at least the current US administration side, Japan likes to position itself and to envisage itself as a state very much was one that fits with European so-called liberal values and international law and the rule of law and so forth. So in that respect, I think there will be a deliberate attempt to, at the very least, continue that role. And obviously, it's not that long. Even now, it's not that long since we had the Japan-Europe ETA and other agreements which really solidify that. So I don't expect to see a huge disruption in Japan-Europe relations, but it does obviously set the stage for potentially something of a new dynamic.
And also pushing more into what it means for Ukraine. I mean, Japan has more and more professed its closeness also to NATO. I mean, it's not a member, obviously, but it's more and more closer to that organization. What can we expect in terms of relations with Ukraine on this?
Yeah, I don't think we will see anything dramatically different. Japan is coming under increasing pressure, obviously, particularly because of its continued reliance on Russian energy. To, if you like, put its money where its mouth is in regard to the Ukraine conflict. But it has taken quite dramatic steps really to support Ukraine throughout the period since the invasion in 2022. So in that respect, again, Takaichi Sanae's stance will fit very well with a hard line against Russia. And I don't expect to see any great change in that. Although one of the problems that might emerge is the lack of predictability in terms of how the US is dealing with Ukraine, or shall we say, how the US is dealing with the Ukraine crisis. And if US policy changes dramatically towards Europe, certainly Japan traditionally has tended to follow the US line, and it would be very difficult for it to break off dramatically from that. However, in lots of respects, because of the pacifist constitution, or so-called pacifist constitution, and avoiding actual official revision and relying instead on reinterpretation, as it has done for the past several years, you might well see an environment where Japan is given a free pass by the United States to play a role in relation to Europe that doesn't openly challenge US policy, but in fact does a lot of things to avoid confrontation between these what are huge economic blocs, after all.
Yeah, and I remember, I mean, the previous Prime Minister of Japan, I mean, that was a very warm meeting in the White House. It looked also Japan was going to be investing more and announced more investments into the United States. A bit disappointed with what happened with the tariffs. I mean, do you think that she's going to be able to get a different sort of approach to Trump here, change some of these economic situations right now? He said, as you mentioned, as a sort of bridge between the U.S. and Europe, is she going to be able to change Trump's mind in any way, make a deal?
Oh, a deal would be great, right? I don't think we're going to see a deal struck by Japan on behalf of the Europeans vis-a-vis the United States. That just doesn't seem realistic. I think what you might see is the United States, depending on who is moving and shaking behind the scenes, readjust some of its tariff policies in relation directly to Japan. But I think it's really beyond the scope of Japanese leadership to be trying to renegotiate deals on behalf of Europe, or even really to try and reposition the way in which the US-Europe relationship acts in that respect. But I do think the fact that there's a change of leadership will certainly open a door to potentially renegotiating direct tariffs. Because after all, the Trump administration has flip-flopped time and again on the tariffs that it's applying, and also the specific ways in which it applies those tariffs. So really any change is an opportunity to renegotiate, yes, and perhaps strike a different deal.
All right, just before we close, in one summary of what you can expect the next few months from this new female Prime Minister from Japan, just briefly before we close.
Well, I would say probably stability, continuation and stability. It's now, if you look at the cabinet that she has selected, it seems to be one of sort of strategic repositioning of both rivals and allies. And after all, the LDP remains in power. So I don't expect any dramatic changes, and I do expect relative stability and continuation.
Okay, so I mean, it is a symbolic moment, and we'll see how it does play out over the next few weeks and months. So thank you so much for that. Really interesting insight. Ramesan there, much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but there's much more coming up right here, so don't go away. Stay on TVP World.